welcome to the AT&T CyberThreat Report for March 29th, 2012. Today we have joining us Dave Gross. Dave is an incident response analyst, and he has a background in system management and development as well. Welcome, Dave, and did you have something to talk with us about today?
Yes, thanks, Brian. I'm going to talk about the recent Microsoft takedown of another botnet, so that should be an interesting discussion.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. John Hogeboom is here with us today. He's a security analyst and a botnet tracker. What do you have to talk about today, John?
Hey, Brian. Much like last week, where we kind of took a deep dive into a particular type of spam that we were seeing in our spam bulk probe that we collect stuff in, I'm going to take a little easier look. This will be a relaxing one where we can kind of look at some of the phishes that we've seen lately, and I wanted to kind of illustrate how those work and some of the tactics that they use in those. So we're going to take a look at a few cases of that.
Okay, I think we're coming up upon phishing season, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's a timely subject, right? Because I was thinking opening day is coming up next weekend, so we'll get our fishing poles out and we'll go see what we can find in our spam probe accounts.
Okay, great.
To some people and to some of the spammers, it's always phishing season.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially around the holidays. So, but certainly phishing season in multiple senses here. I'm Brian Rexroad. I'll cover the internet weather, and I have a few little other comments that we'll discuss as well. And first of all, just to update you on contact information, you certainly can contact us through email at cyberthreat@list.att.com. There are also some of us that have Twitter accounts. I have a Twitter account at Brian Rexroad, and Jim Clausing also. He's not here today, but usually participates in this program. He also has a Twitter account, J Clausing. That's JCLAUSING. And I'd also like to put in just a quick plug for a new blog that I put out. Last week I'd mentioned a blog on DNS Changer and how we could prevent DNS Changer type malware. A new blog has been put out. This one's mostly oriented toward enterprise user operators and ways of identifying or mitigating DNS Changer malware in your enterprise. So go ahead and take a look at that. The link to the Exchange blog is actually networkingexchangeblog.att.com/topics/security. And you should be able to see that blog out there. Let me go ahead and get started here with just a few comments. There have been a number of articles that have been showing up in the media related to a posting that was called Operation Global Blackout. This was basically a threat to launch a DNS amplification denial service attack against the Internet root servers. And the focus here would be to take down the Internet root servers and consequently affect DNS for everybody on the Internet and consequently take down the Internet. Now, my personal opinion here is I don't think there's too much to get worried about here, and there are several reasons for that. One is, the DNS amplification threat that is using DNS amplification for denial of service attacks is a known threat. There are ways to control it, and although there are certainly DNS amplification attacks that are taking place, we don't think that that's going to be, that fact in itself is not really a significant factor in this particular threat. Now, the next thing to sort of keep in mind here is that the root servers, the Internet root servers, have been attacked in denial of service attacks previously. We expect that that would take place again in the future, and they are prepared for denial of service attacks. So far, we still haven't identified anything special about this particular threat that suggests that it constitutes any additional worry. Now, in addition to that, there were a couple of posts on Twitter from the group that presumably made this threat, and they indicated that threat was a fake threat and that participants shouldn't participate in this attack. So there's even a question about whether there's even a tangible threat to be concerned about. And certainly a couple of other factors here. ISPs could be a contributing factor. That is, if there is something that's affecting the Internet, certainly ISPs are going to participate in any way that they can, and there are ways that we'd be able to participate as Internet service providers to help protect against this type of attack if it were to take place. And then last but not least, I think that is, the group that presumably had posted this threat, to take down the internet would be contrary to some of their objectives. That is, much of what their objectives are is to actually promulgate through social media information about how they've been successful with attacks and the underlying message associated with that. So taking down the internet would be actually counter to their objectives. So we don't see that this is a particularly, and again, I'm expressing my opinion here, that I don't see it as a particularly tangible threat. So we'll have to see if that actually is the case. The scheduled date for this activity, by the way, is Saturday, March 31st. Now, if you are still concerned about it, certainly a couple of things that you can do. One is protect your own DNS infrastructure. And two concepts here. One is you want to make sure that your DNS infrastructure is not susceptible to a denial of service attack. In fact, all of your infrastructure, you should be planning for denial of service attacks. And then secondly, make sure that your DNS infrastructure is not in a position to facilitate attacks. That is, learn a little bit about DNS amplificated attacks and how you can configure your DNS servers to help prevent that. And if you have the opportunity, one perhaps mitigating factor would be to extend your time to live for domain names so that if there is attack, it would extend the period of time in which caching servers would retain your resolution and possibly not have to consult the root servers for resolution. There is a paper that's available. So if you're an AT&T customer, enterprise customer, you can consult with your AT&T Client Business Manager. We have a white paper that goes into this into more detail, and it's available on unlimited distribution. So with that, I'm going to go ahead.
Brian, I think one other thing to mention here, you kind of alluded to it, but the root servers just give you the pointer to the next level, but you do have all these caching servers around that caches a lot of the information for quite a while, and so an attack on the root servers would have a delayed effect because, basically you have to have the root servers down for a long time to have a significant effect on the resolution.
That's right. So that was the suggestion around extending TTL if you can. There are certain circumstances where that doesn't work too well, so you want to investigate that further. But certainly, if you can extend the TTL, what that will do is drive the caching servers to retain the already learned information about DNS resolution and cause a sort of a delayed effect there. That is, the attack would have to persist for a much longer period of time until those TTLs begin to expire for it to have a significant effect. Yes, right. Thank you, Dave. Good clarification.
The important thing I think you mentioned to me is that people should check their DNS servers that they have that are on the Internet, make sure they aren't acting as open resolvers, because the reason these amplification attacks can exist at all is because there are a lot of people with misconfigured DNS servers out there on the Internet that anybody can reach and use as a reflection vector in order to facilitate that attack. So the less people that actually have misconfigured DNS servers in that respect, the less likely that these types of attacks will be able to be successful in the future. So that's an important one for me that I've been kind of trying to resolve over the past few years, talking with various customers and whatnot.
That's a good point, John. That's, I think, something we could probably stand to make more publicly known about the how to configure DNS servers properly to prevent this type of thing. Yes, good point. So let's go ahead and move on here. I'm going to go ahead and pass the reins to Dave. And what's happening with Microsoft these days?
Well, Microsoft this past Friday did a takeover of Zeus family of botnets. This includes some of the derivatives that do Zeus, SpyEye, and another one called ICE-IX. They got a court order to do this, and they worked with U.S. Marshals and so on. First of all, this family of botnets, it's estimated that there are 13 million infected machines worldwide. They've stolen or allegedly stolen money from consumers and from banks and so on. And the estimates are differ here. Some of them say like 100 million. Some of them say $500 million. But there's been quite a lot of money stolen and credentials stolen as well. I mean, basically, what they do is they get into the machine, get into the browser. They can do key logging, so they can steal the credentials there, and also operate and do things in the background on your behalf. Especially like while you're connected to a banking site, they can start some transactions in the background and so on. So what Microsoft did is they've seized servers in 2 states. One was in Illinois, the other is in Pennsylvania, which seemed to be a central server that was doing command and control and getting a lot of check-ins from a lot of the bots. And instead of shutting these down, they're continuing to run them so that they can identify the domains that are in operation and also identify the users that are infected and try to track down some of the people behind it. They've also seized 800 domains, and they have control of those domains now that are involved in this. One of the interesting things that they've done with this is that they've charged that this group that's behind this is involved in trademark infringement with against their trademarks, and also they joined with Financial Services Information Sharing and Alliance Center, and also the NACHA Electronics Payment Association. And they've also done trademark infringement on the NACHA group. I'm not sure about the other financial group. But in a lot of their spam emails that they use to entice people to click on something and get infected, they do use these different names and trademarks that they have. So that's one of the main things behind the complaint, that they're using that. So that's about it. I don't know, John, if you have any more background on what Zeus does or the impact of this type of thing, what you think it's going to mean.
So what I wanted to touch on there related to what you're saying is in terms of defrauding other types of organizations. We've talked about this in the spam probe analysis segment of my report that I usually do. FedEx is a big one, and like you said, National Automated Clearinghouse Association is another one. A lot of those mail delivery services, FedEx, DHL, et cetera, as well as a bunch of others. So I'm sure that's what they're referring to here. So that's kind of tying those two things together from what we have talked about over the past several months in my report with what they're talking about there. I think this is a really good thing, because Zeus and SpyEye are one of the largest botnet organizations, so to speak. It's Botware family. And there's a lot of various Zeus botnets running using that toolkit and SpyEye. ICE-IX, I think it might also be called ICE-9, is another variant based on when the toolkit was released to the public back in early last year, I think it was. A lot of people started to make their own variants of it. So this is going to be a big blow, I think, in terms of knocking down a lot of infected hosts, because we know and we've seen that Zeus infections are rampant. They've been going on and on for several years now, and there's a lot of infected victims from the various types of people running Zeus botnet operations. There's one other thing I was going to say is that I'm curious to find out, now this isn't going to impact, there's a new family of Zeus out there that was developed from the toolkit that was released to the public, and it uses peer-to-peer as its command and control, which is not easily disruptible using this type of method. So they're a little bit late to the party in terms of knocking out all of the Zeus-type botnets out there. This new variant is not as easily knocked out by this type of activity where they're taking over the registrar and repointing the resolution to like a Microsoft IP or something where they can keep track of how many infected hosts are. So it'll be interesting to see. It's definitely going to help in the long run. We'll see how things go. I haven't done any analysis to see how many fewer victims we see nowadays, but over the next couple of weeks, we'll take a look at that.
So I guess I'll make a couple of additional comments here. This is, well, first of all, Dave, I think you had mentioned about 800 domains that had been taken over. And I'm not sure, I presume that this is still somewhat of a moving target. But in the court order, they named actually about 3,300, in fact, almost 3,400 domain names that were presumed to be associated with this botnet. So if they've only been able to take down or repoint 800 or so of those domains, not the complete set, there's a reasonable chance that some portions of this are still in operation. So I think we should, keep in mind that whereas, there's the accusation aspect of it, actually having been able to take control of some aspects of it, they may not have complete control of it. And keep in mind as well that when we're talking about $100 million revenue operations here, this is, at least in my experience, what I've seen, the operations around Zeus and the money laundering and the mules that are associated with it is a very sophisticated operation. And kudos to Microsoft for doing this. I hope it puts a big dent in it. I can't expect that we will have, be relieved of this as a security concern. So don't let down your guard on this particular case. Also, what we're showing here, there is a link to the Microsoft News Center that has some more details on the takedown operation, and also has a link to the court order itself and the details around that. So if you have a security concern, if you're evaluating these types of things, it's well worth taking a look at what is in there, because there will be some, what I believe to be valuable signatures to include as a part of any enterprise security analysis that you're doing. All right, very good. I thought that's, again, kudos to Microsoft for doing this. I think they're setting a good precedent in terms of putting a damper and a deterrent on these types of activities. So with that, let's go ahead and pass the reins over to John, and let's take a little bit of a look at phishing season.
Yeah, so phishing season, right? And here in New Jersey, where we're at, it's next weekend is phishing season, opening season for phishing. So I thought it might be appropriate to take a look at the phishing aspect of what we see in our unsolicited bulk email probe account. So what this is, and we've talked about this before, is we have a bunch of basically bogus fake email accounts that shouldn't ever be receiving email, but they're set up and provisioned on our service so that if anybody sends anything to them, we'll collect it. And we know that it was unsolicited because this email address shouldn't really be known by anybody. It's not a real email address for a real person. It's it's just a probe account, we call it. So in any event, we've talked in the past about usually we look at emails that come in that either have malware attached in them or point you to malware. So last week we talked about a spam email that we collected in here, a bunch of them actually, that pointed to a black hole exploit drive-by infection. So today, that was pretty technical. We're going to do a kind of easier ride here. This will be pretty slow and easy, not going to tax your brain too much, but we're going to look at some phishing examples that we've seen and kind of the tactics that have been used and things you can look out for when you receive emails that you might suspect to be of a phishing nature.
All right, so, John, I love your clip art here.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a little guy getting hooked by a criminal. So that's kind of what they're trying to do. They're trying to fish you, get you on the hook, and steal your login credentials for various websites. So one thing I want to point out before we get any further, I'm going to talk about victim organizations. So just like Dave was saying before, a lot of the Zeus operations would purport to be from FedEx or Notcha or other organizations. All of these ones that I'm going to talk about are emails that are purporting to be somebody that they're not. This first one is purporting to be from Yahoo, from the Yahoo mail service. And there's a couple of interesting things here. So here's the phish email that comes in. One of the things initially right off the bat that's kind of interesting that I pointed out is that the language encoding is in Cyrillic. Unless you happen to be in Russia or speak with people in Russia, which I would assume would be pretty infrequent for most of the people watching the program, that's kind of an interesting tip-off that you might be a little, well, this is interesting that whoever sent this email uses that as their native language. So that's maybe an indicator that you might want to watch out for. The next thing to point out here is this in the email. It's not a very good one. I've seen a lot more clever ones, but it's basically saying you need to log in to update your account from being deactivated. So they try to entice you in, saying that your account's going to be deactivated unless you log in, and they give you a link here that looks like the legitimate Yahoo Mail login page, but it's really not. They're tricking you here. If you actually click on this link or mouse over it, you'll see what it's really pointing to is this other location, ironically enough, in Russia. It's registered under a Russian domain, which kind of ties back to the Cyrillic encoding scheme here. And we'll take a look at the actual page that you would see here. Looks pretty authentic when you look at it. If you look at the URL, which you probably can't see because it's so small, but it's not Yahoo that you're at. But the rest of the page really does look like it is. This one, when you submit to it, just submits to a PHP script, saves your login credentials, and from that point they've got you. So they've got your login ID and password to Yahoo. What they're going to do with that, I don't know. They could log in and report to DU, check your email, what other types of things they might want to get out of your account.
Probably, another thing to sort of point out here, John, is that this page, anytime you're typing in a login, it's good to get into the habit of checking to see if that page is an encrypted page, if it's using an SSL certificate. And this is a case where it's not. So, just a good thing to entrench in your mind. If you're sharing any secret, password being a secret, make sure that secret is protected. And this is a case, obviously, it's not.
Right. And I think hopefully most of the people that are watching our program are pretty security savvy. They're not going to get fooled by any of these, hopefully. But I thought it was good to just kind of go over and show you the kind of tactics that they're doing here. Because we see this day in and day out. They come through, and a lot of them we block. A lot of these get taken down very quickly. As a matter of fact, I think most of these probably will be taken down by the time that this program airs. That's me knocking on wood, but I know all of them are known about. So by cross-referencing with PhishTank, which is another service that you can go look at on the Internet, that kind of tracks phishing.
And by the way, John, I point that out partly not just to make the point of folks that are listening to the program, but if you're facilitating a trading program for an enterprise, for example, or even as a part of an ISP, for example, that kind of mindset, that thought process, making sure to check for these types of things is an important factor. Yep.
And I was just going to say, as one site goes down, probably 3 others come up, so they spring up very quickly.
Yep, that's a good point. So they do go away quick, but tomorrow there's going to be a whole new batch of them. So, but they don't have very long lifespans usually.
Right, and usually the way they're taken out is with the DNS name being repointed or something. So, the website's still there, the code's still there. It's just a matter of, bringing it up on a different domain name or, maybe tweaking it a little bit.
Right. So next one, this is a Bank of America phish, basically indicating that they noticed some unusual activity on your account, and you've got to open this attachment, go to this link. This is a little bit unusual in that they put it as an attachment in here. I find this to be, that's something I would never open. Maybe some people think that that's not unusual, but you should if you see it, especially coming from a reputable organization like Bank of America or any of the ones that we're going to cover here. They normally wouldn't do that. Again, we've got interesting that it's encoded in Cyrillic, so that's another little data point there to kind of raise your hackles up to be worried about. if you open this HTML that they've attached in here, so in the previous case, they pointed you to a website. In this case, they're going to give you all the HTML as an attachment. So they don't even have to provision a website, really, although they do, but not to host the actual page itself. It's going to be in your browser. So when we look at this one, again, I'm looking at it from my local machine, but it looks pretty good. It does pull some images and whatnot from an external website. And what this one does is it's a very convincing-looking web page. Once you fill this information in, they're asking you for obvious things that they want, like your PIN number, your login ID, passcodes, all this kind of stuff that these organizations are not going to do to try to get this information from you this way. Bank of America won't contact you in this way, I assure you of that. If you submit this form, like I said, the page itself is, you're looking at it on your own machine, but it submits to a kind of a public forum hosting website. So there's these forum hosting websites that will do like guest books and things like that for you. And so they're using that kind of illegitimately for this purpose. So I would expect that they would get this shut down pretty quickly because the people who run this website should be able to detect or be notified that that's happening. Next one, Regions Bank. Again, Central European for the encoding here. So that's another data point that I didn't intentionally pick these this way either. It's just that's the way it was. Again, this one's sent as attachment with an HTML file. Looks pretty legitimate, but again, they're indicating a strange IP from a different location and was recently logged into your bank account, so we're taking some action to protect you, so please log in here and change your password. Well, that's not what is really happening. They're trying to phish for your information. I thought this one was interesting because if you actually look at, again, the HTML was sent in an email as an attachment. When you open it, it's actually a lot of obfuscated JavaScript. So they're trying to hide what they're actually doing in the page here, but your browser knows enough to decode this and display it like you see on the screen here. This one asks for pretty much everything under the sun from you, down to almost your blood type. I mean, it's really asking every single piece. It's longer than even this page is. It's probably twice as long as this. So, and it submits to a website, camtracking.info. This website is listed up on PhishTank. It's also listed as been hacked by a hacking organization at some point last year as well. So they have some issues there. So it's been used for some bad purposes for quite a while now. So that's where it's actually submitting the credentials that someone might type in here too. Earthlink, again, Cyrillic encoding. Again, I did not pick these specifically because of this. It just happens that a lot of these apparently are coming from Russia, a lot of the phishing schemes, or that part of the world. This one, again, trying to indicate that there's been a bunch of login attempts to your Earthlink account from a foreign IP address, so they're going to lock it. You better log in and reset your password. We're trying to protect you. Well, in reality, they're trying to coax you into something that's not a reality of the situation. Again, this URL that looks like a real Earthlink URL is not really where you would go if you clicked on here. It takes you to a person's public or a person's web page up on Comcast.net, which immediately redirects you to another location at another spot, and I'll show you what that looks like. Point you to this website at zxcuin.com. Again, this is known. It's up on PhishTank, so it's probably going to get taken down pretty soon. But at the time I put this together this morning, it was still up. And again, looks like a very legitimate Earthlink. If you went to Earthlink's login page, it would look just like this. But if, again, as Brian mentioned, should get your users familiar with, look at the URL. Is it really Earthlink that you're going to? Is it encrypted? HTTPS encrypted? And one of the other things they did here, which is kind of clever, is they actually took the icon from Earthlink and stuck it in here as the .ico file. So it maybe looks even a little more legitimate, but it's not. This one, just like the others, if you type in your information, just saves it, stores it into a PHP script that they have hosted up on this website here at the zxcuin.com.
Another interesting thing that they have on here is that they have ads.
Yes, I noticed that. They actually, so it's pulling the real information from that Earthlink page, I believe, to determine my location, because you can see it has some information about New Jersey, which is really where I'm from. So it gave me an ad that was relative to my location, which gives a little bit more convincing type of aspect to it.
So, John, I think this is the second one that you've pointed out that appears to be targeting personal email. And I think there are probably three things to sort of pay attention to here. Some folks, and I've seen this kind of case as well, if they want to get to my personal email, I don't have anything interesting or useful in there. I just get spam and junk mail. Well, first of all, if they can get your password, there are certainly cases where people use the same password for one place as they do another place. And so getting that password is perhaps very valuable to these folks. They may not, in fact, be targeting email. They may be going to try to get some other things. Another item is I've seen cases where, in fact, there is personal and important information that's shown in email. For example, the banks that you use and other information like that might provide insight that these attackers might go after. So make sure you're paying special attention to more specifics about what might be showing up in your email that attackers might be able to take advantage of. And then third, last but not least, I think oftentimes what ends up happening is these accounts get used for spamming operations to perhaps compromise others or perhaps do some sort of advertising, shady products and that sort of thing. And as a consequence of that, what will end up happening is the provider will detect that spamming activity, perhaps because of complaints that are coming in, block the account, and then the user of the account ends up having to go through a process of getting it re-enabled and fixing the problem. So that's certainly an inconvenience. So even though these are personal email accounts that are being targeted with these phishing attacks, it is something to be paying attention to.
All right, that's a really good point, especially the last one. I know that there's a lot of groups out there, so to speak, or malicious actors that once they get your email login and password, they'll go in and they'll actually look at your contacts of who you have sent email to, and they will start sending emails to those people, trying to get them infected with something or maybe phish them for credentials as well to kind of extend their network. So definitely be cautious about that. And like you said, there are a lot of services, like Facebook being one of them, that use your email address as your login ID. So they already have that one piece of information. If you don't use a different password or you use one that's easily guessable, like, if maybe you use Earth123, on Facebook you use Face123, they might figure that scheme out. So you want to be clever about your passwords. You definitely want to use different passwords on different websites.
Yep.
Last one, a PayPal phish. And there's only a slight modification of this. This one was sent as a MHT web page archive. This is, I forget, it's like multi-HTML, I think it might stand for, which basically is a format. It's an archive format that can contain HTML and images all together in one thing. So that way it doesn't have to go out to a remote site to get the images and whatnot. Another indicator that's a little strange on this is you'll see it's sending to a whole bunch of people. That's the tip-off that something's strange. We didn't see a weird encoding scheme here, though, so this is definitely a different group, or most likely a different group involved in this one. And the PayPal website's very legitimate looking. The page itself looks like it's from PayPal. But again, it's being served off of my local machine. This would be very odd. You would never really want to ever submit something like this or fill any of these in, obviously. It's submitting the actual credentials that someone might type in to an actual guestbook application up on a free web hosting site. These are not bad guys necessarily. Somebody's using them just like someone could use Yahoo's web hosting or any of these free web hosting services. But this is a free web hosting service that has some PHP and CGI functionality in there. And this person, somebody, the bad guy, has set up a web page here with a guestbook application. The thing I find interesting that they're using the guestbook application is you can actually set these up so that when somebody fills in all the information, it actually emails that to you via this guestbook PHP script. So you get them like real time. You can find out people as they as they're being phished. You get the information like right away. So I find that kind of interesting.
Yeah. You know, John, in the URL there, it is a file that's on the local machine. I think there would be perhaps some circumstances where users that are, somewhat familiar with some security, security activities or security concerns would say, hey, I'm just filling a file on my local machine. Why should I be concerned about it? But it's still being done inside the browser, and there's web activity taking place in the background. So easy to overlook that, I would say, in some cases.
Right. I suppose. I guess I take it for granted that I would find that fishy, but you might be right that not everyone might.
Yeah, certainly fishy, but it could be a little bit deceiving for some.
Right. And also in some cases, we were talking about some of these banks sending you email and stuff. If you've never given the bank your email address, then the question is, how did they find you? I mean, you have to be very suspicious of stuff coming in and say, would they have this contact information to contact me about my account if I never shared it with them?
Absolutely true. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into the Internet weather activity for the last week or so here. I've selected some items that look to be of interest, so I'll go ahead and list them real quickly here. One is ICMP Type 5 activity. That's basically a redirect message. So we'll take a look at that and see what's going on. We reported last week on port 210 TCP scanning activity. That's persisting. Hasn't changed significantly since the last week, but we'll go ahead and take a look at that. There's been an increase in the number of sources scanning on port 135, and while activity to try to scan for or exploit port 135 applications isn't unusual, this is a sort of a notable change in activity. So there's some sort of a botnet that's doing some scanning there. We'll take a quick look at it. There was some scanning activity on port 8089, and this turns out to be related to some other things that we've talked about. There are several other ports related to it, so we'll take a look at that one as well. We see some activity on port 6257 UDP. This shows as sort of scan SIPs, or there's sources that are doing scanning activity. Looks like P2P activity. Again, I think this is one that's related to WinMX, file sharing application. That continues as well, and we'll talk about that just briefly. There's some scanning activity on port 1000 TCP. This is an increase in the number of flows, that is, probes that are taking place on that port. And that's a relatively new one, so we'll take a little bit of a look at that. There's an application that's associated with that might be of interest. In particular, it's one associated with basically a security application for computer-aided design systems. And then last but not least on this list here is port 2967. Again, we reported on that several times. So let's go ahead and dig into some of these. First of all, ICMP Type 5, this is ICMP redirect. Basically, this is a message that says that, you can't really get there from here. You kind of need to route it through a different path. And it's not unusual to see this activity on the Internet, but there have been some sort of changes and trends here. And you can see it in the graph. Starting around March 24th, we saw sort of a surge in that activity, as well as around the 26th, and then sort of continuing on. It seems to have tapered off around the 29th or so. But there were some activities associated with it. On one side, it seems to map to several ISPs that these messages are coming from, and that would be a response to something from another, sort of the other side, and that is where this message is being sent to. The two in these ICMP redirect messages is several addresses in China. So it appears that this may be perhaps precipitated by some scanning activity, perhaps in a way to indicate that scanning isn't welcome, for example. I'm not really sure about this, but you want to probably pay a little bit of attention to see if you have any unusual activity related to ICMP Type 5 on your network. Next one, scanning activity. This is sources. This is an increase in the number of sources that are scanning on port 210 TCP. This was the ANSI V39.50 application. Really, it's a library that is literally libraries that hold books, database-type access application for being able to manage inventories of the books in a library. And so it's conceivable that folks might be scanning around to see what libraries are out there and what inventory exists, or perhaps it's something looking for some vulnerability associated with that application. It's not a well-known application, and the activity we're seeing this week is consistent with what we reported last week. That is, the sources are in Korea, China, and the United States. For the most part, there are no connections that are being made associated with this scanning activity, but there is a little bit of that taking place. So, again, something you want to pay attention to if you have applications on port 210. Next one, as I mentioned, increase in the sources, number of sources that are scanning on port 135 TCP. This is associated with port mapping on Windows applications. It is well known in terms of having a number of exploits that have used this port in the past. And so it's not unusual to see scanning activity here. The thing that's changed is that, as mentioned, we typically have a noise floor of about 150 sources that we see scanning the Internet for this particular port. That jumped up right around March 25th. It's stayed relatively high since then. It's jumped up from about 150 to 450. So it's not a high number. It's not increasing significantly, so it doesn't seem to be indicating that it's a growing problem. But it is probably a botnet that there's something that controlled a number of machines and increased the number of sources that are scanning on that port. There are various sources in various countries that are associated with this, but it seems to be a little bit weighted towards sources in Italy. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but it does seem to be weighted sort of that direction. Like I said, it's a very commonly exploited port, so there really shouldn't be port 135 exposed to the Internet. Next one here, similar to what we reported last week. I think we perhaps reported on port 88 scanning or one of these other ports scanning last week, but I dug into this a little bit more over, activity over the last 30 days or so. In this particular case, it showed up as scanning activity on port 8089 TCP, but there are several others, and those include port port 88, port 90, port 8080, which isn't shown on the graph here, because there is sort of a consistent amount of scanning or a persistent amount of scanning on port 8080. Port 8081, port 8086, port 8088, port 8090, and port 8888. So we believe this is activity looking for open proxies of various types on the Internet. And all of this activity is associated with a single source that originates from China that's doing this scanning activity. And as you can see, there's a very similar profile in the over time for each of the ports that are showing up here. Each port is shown in a different color. Next item is P2P, that is point-to-point behavior on port 6257 UDP. This is the WinMX application, as I mentioned earlier. Again, there isn't any strong indication that there's any malicious activity associated with this, other than the fact that it starts, it stops, it starts, and it stops. And that's a relatively unusual behavior to see outside the botnet space. So I still wonder if there might be some maliciousness behind this somewhere, but I don't have anything to really base that on. Participants, as usual, are mostly in Europe, United States, and Japan.
So, Brian, this one, it looks like it started on March 16th, the most recent time, and just continues, right? It hasn't stopped since then?
That's correct. It's persisted since March 16th. It continues on to through today. And the last time we had seen this activity was way back around Thanksgiving, Christmas time frame, around around November, perhaps November 30th time frame last year. And there was a brief pause and then some additional activity in the beginning of December. There was also another activity way back around September timeframe last year as well. But in between, it's been relatively quiet. So, these are things that, again, there isn't anything really a strong indicator that this is malicious activity, but it is relatively unusual to see on and off type things like this.
Right, and it seems like this one, as I said, is persisting longer than the other times we've seen it before.
Yes, and there may be some rationale behind this associated with some sort of, I hate to use the word malicious because we really don't know, but we need to be cautious of that sort of thing. Next one is what I will call sporadic scanning activity on port 1000 TCP. The application that's registered to this is an application called CADLock. This is actually sort of a security package that's designed to help, I believe it's collaboration between computer-aided design systems. I didn't investigate that in a lot of detail. You can go ahead and investigate that yourself, but suffice to say that there is some scanning activity on this port. Perhaps there's some vulnerability or exploit that's being explored here. The activity started around, looks like the 24th or so of March, sporadically taking place, somewhere between 1 million and 8 million flows per hour or probes per hour that we've seen with some sort of lull periods built into that, very spiky. And that's from a single source in China that's doing that. So, you could see that if somebody were, for example, looking to steal intellectual property, if you could find a poorly protected computer-aided design system, perhaps being used for collaboration between different companies, and certainly that might be a way to get that sort of information. Next one here is sporadic probing activity on port 2967. We've been reporting on this for several weeks. No significant change. We're still seeing, short periods of time where there's on the order of about 10 to 17 million probes per hour on this particular port. It's associated with semantic antivirus, a vulnerability from several years ago that presumably has been patched, but for some reason there's still some scanning activity on this port. So you want to make sure that this port is blocked in your firewalls or those applications have been patched. And, this might be one of the cases where the search is for that, forgotten machine that happens to be hanging out there, perhaps doesn't have good protection or patching associated with it, but could turn into a gateway into an enterprise environment. So just because you're not aware that you're using this application, you might want to check around and make sure that that's the case.
And there are a lot of cases where certain hardware vendors will ship as part of their base image some free antivirus software that might work for 3 months or something like that, but it never really deactivates itself. So that could be a case here too, where you might have a machine that you never actually registered or bought that software, but it came with the base image and it's just always kind of been running there. So they might be looking for machines of that category that are still out there, older, have this old version on there that was never actually registered and, bought.
That's a good point, John. In fact, you can take it one step further. Machines that might have been infected by malware some time ago that, perhaps was never really noticed, but has been successful at blocking patches and updates associated with the antivirus in the background might also come victim in a similar way. Good point. All right, the next one is I wanted to point out a piece of errata. I think last week I had reported on an increase in the number of sources that were scanning on 3389 TCP. That fact was true, but the time frame associated with that was not quite correct. So what I wanted to point out is in the graph here we're showing the last 90 days of the number of sources that are scanning on port 3389. This is remote desktop protocol, so it's a port that's often scanned for activity. This is particularly significant now because there has been not just a vulnerability, but an exploit that's been identified associated with this. I think the exploit, at the last time we checked, was only really able to cause a denial of service, but that's a step on the way to being able to actually penetrate a machine. Now, the graph is worthwhile to take a quick look at because back around January timeframe, we only saw on the order of, perhaps a couple hundred sources scanning on this port at any given time. It's jumped up into the thousands from the time to time. We peaked out at about 4,500 sources that were detected around, maybe March 19th timeframe, March 18th timeframe, and then that dropped off very abruptly. Perhaps whoever was using a botnet to do scanning on this particular port turned that off to sort of lay low during this period where the vulnerability and the exploit has gained attention. And we are seeing a very subtle, so it's dropped down to on the order of about 1,000 sources per hour they're scanning. And it is very regular, so that indicates that there is perhaps some persistent activity still taking place, perhaps another botnet or a piece of that same botnet. And there seems to be a little bit of an uptick over the last couple of days, an upward ramp. So that will be something, again, to continue to pay attention to. Remote desktop protocol, absolutely, you want to make sure that remote desktops are protected. And this is one way that, enterprises should be paying attention, perhaps not exposing this application to the Internet. With that, let's take a look at the distribution of probing activity that's taken place. Very similar to what we've seen in previous weeks. Port 445 near the top here, port 1433 also near the top. That's Microsoft SQL database. Port 6515 that was associated with McAfee antivirus, so basically a distribution protocol for virus updates, is still being scanned. That presumably has been patched, but perhaps the scenario that John described a little bit earlier with antivirus that hasn't been updated would still, or hasn't been registered, would still apply here. Port 3389, we talked about that. Port 22, TCP, that's secure shell, that is always on the list. Port 80 is always on the list. This port 123, I try to point out in most cases, is not security related, has to do with the way the protocol itself is structured. I mentioned earlier about port 8080 having some persistent scanning that shows up on the map here. And we also still have this port 27977 we reported last week. That's another piece of errata I need to point out, is that I think I had reported, and let's go ahead to the next page here. I think I reported this as port 27997 last week, and in fact I saw the typo on this page. It really is 27977 TCP that we need to be taking a look at. And this still is, looks like it's growing a little bit here. It is since about February 22nd. We've had some growth in the number of probes that are probing on this port. It's coming from basically a single source in China based on our analysis. And there was something on the Internet that associated, or at least allegedly associated this port with the TDSS malware rootkit. So there may be a relationship there, there may not be, but again, something you want to pay attention to if you're seeing port 27977 activity on your network. And then last but not least, the number of sources that are probing. Port 445 seems to be growing here. I don't know that it's actually growing. Perhaps it is that other activity is decreasing a little bit here, but we also see port 23, port 210 we talked about, port 1562, I think that's a PC Connect manager, and 3389 we talked about, port 80, and then port 135 did show up in this graph as well. This 5223 is, I don't believe that's security related. I think that's related to a legitimate P2P protocol, as well as 3072. 3074 is also, I think, a legitimate P2P protocol. So with that, I think that pretty much covers it for today. Any last comments from the group here? Okay, so again, if you want to contact us, cyberthreat@list.att.com. You can get this program on the tech channel, that's techchannel.att.com, or you can get it on YouTube. You can search, actually, I think there's a directory there, ATT Tech Channel, that you can go to. I guess that's a channel on YouTube. Through the social networking, you can reach us through Facebook. That's the ATT Tech Channel as well, and we mentioned the Twitter accounts. And last but not least, you can also get this through iTunes or FeedBurner. Just search for the AT&T CyberThreat Report. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And thank you, John and Dave. And for all of you out there, keep your network safe.